Our guest today is Rathke. He's the founder of the Association of Community Organizations for Reform now called ACORN. He was ACORN's chief organizer from 1970 until he stepped down in 2008. He is also the publisher of Social Policy. Okay, encourage you to read it. It's a journal for scholars and activists. He attended Williams College. While there, he organized Draft Resistance, Students for a Democratic Society. Later organized welfare recipients in Boston and in Springfield for the National Welfare Rights Organization. At ACORN, he developed the organization to become the largest lower-income working families organization with 175,000 dues-paying families spread across the country. ACORN no longer exists, but ACORN International does. And he's recently opened offices in Peru, Toronto, Vancouver, Canada, 11 other countries, including India, and Italy, and probably two others. You got one more?
I don't think so.
Okay.
People on the streets not in jail.
Yes, okay. In 1980, in New Orleans, he also founded an independent union of workers at the Hyatt. That union became part of SEIU, Local 100, where he became chief organizer for the SEIU there. That organization organizes public sector workers, school employees, Head Start, healthcare workers, as well as private sector workers in hospitality, janitorial, and other service industries. He's published a number of books which will be available following the presentation tonight. The most recent and I think relevant right now is Citizen Wealth, a winning campaign to save working families, where he argues that food stamps, unemployment insurance, tax relief offer only temporary stopgap measures to address the problems of the working poor and the poor in general, and that we need other types of programs that create more stability for creating wealth through home ownership, job acquisition and security, and at the same time fighting predatory attempts to reduce the relatively little wealth that working people have. In his book, Citizen Wealth, he provides concrete examples of how this has been done within ACORN, working with banks, corporations, labor unions, and various community groups. I'd like to welcome Rathke.
Well, I appreciate getting to deliver one of the working class studies lectures, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the warm welcome. I didn't realize y'all were going to make me feel so much at home. Because in New Orleans, this is our default temperature, so it's important to think positively about it and acclimate yourself because, given the way the climate is going in the world, not for all of us, but for some of you, this is your future. In New Orleans, we just get to see it a little bit earlier than most places. So I'm not a big PowerPoint guy, but we're going to try the whole PowerPoint. I mean, somehow it sort of ups your game, lecture, working class. You feel like in India, the first time we went, there was a delegation of community and labor organizers, and we were meeting with all the major unions, and we were meeting with C2 and their national leadership in Delhi, and I was the head of that delegation, and all of a sudden he said to me, well, what does the working class in the United States think about? And I don't even remember the topic, but I said, God, I've never been asked to speak for the entire working class of the United States. Maybe I should go and call John Sweeney right now and just ask if I can do that. So, but this is a good time to talk about the working class. It turns out everybody loves the working class. Who knew? And good luck with that. For 45 years, I've been an organizer, a community organizer, a labor organizer, welfare rights organizer. I've organized unions, community organizations, various kinds of groups. So being presented a topic like labor and community organizations, boundaries and opportunities, I mean, I could go on forever. This could be Occupy This Place. But we'll try to restrain ourselves because one of the things I'm looking forward to is learning from listening, which is how organizing really works, and getting to the questions and answers later. Mindful of the fact that this is a Facebook generation and that in some ways social change through something as methodical as community organizing doesn't make as much sense as slacktivism or ways that you can sort of put up a petition and change the world supposedly. This was a young woman who didn't like $5 ATM fees. And there you go, 150,000 signatures later. So you would have to believe another Facebook victory, like Egypt. I began organizing, though, a long time ago. In 1960, I dropped out of college several times to organize against a war that was very important back then in Vietnam, Southeastern Asia. It was a wet war as opposed to the current dry wars. At that time, you were either part of the solution or part of the problem. So I was convinced revolution was in the air. These were the 60s. Social change, you couldn't wait, you couldn't stop. You just had to grab it. It was a sprint. It turned out it was a marathon, not a sprint. And that forces the development of different kinds of organizing skills and plans. In some ways, it turns out as well that if you look at the last 40 years of organizing, a lot of it has been Sisyphusian. We've been pushing rocks up a hill and watching them too many times roll back. Some of the things we won in the 70s, we've now seen dismantled now in the devolution of the 21st century. For a brief stint organizing welfare recipients with the National Welfare Rights Organization, and incidentally, all of you probably know this, and I'm sure it's part of the curriculum, but the National Welfare Rights Organization, which was an important movement in the late 60s, was actually founded here in Ohio, June 30th, 1966. One person, two people seem to realize that. It was founded on a march from Cleveland to Columbus in order to protest cutbacks. So this turns out to be an Ohioan theme, I guess, over the generations, is cutbacks. But I left welfare rights in order to found something called ACORN on June 18th, 1970. I'd worked in welfare rights when I was 20 years old. I founded ACORN when I was 21. And luckily, like some of you, and some of you may remember being 21, at 21 I was able to do that because at 21 as an organizer, I knew everything. And it turns out only over the last decade have I realized I didn't quite know what I thought I knew in 1970. Who knows if I'd tried to do that when I was 30 or 40. But regardless, I started ACORN in 1970, and I ran the operation for 38 years. When I left in June 2nd of 2008, we had 100 offices. We had actually, this is the problem with Wikipedia, unless somebody works all the time, they don't sort of keep it up to date. So we actually had almost 500,000 members at that time across 38 states. Housing corporations, 3 radio stations, several labor unions. It was actually a pretty big operation. At the point I left, we were en route in the whole family of organizations to spend something like $100 million that year. And now, as Professor Russo shared, and as many people know, it no longer exists. It's still very difficult for me to believe that might have been possible. But it's a video world, it turns out, and what that meant was different, and how organizations deal with it is something that I've spent a lot of time since then watching and mourning and thinking about. And part of that time I wrote a book called Citizen Wealth, and citizen wealth for me really means income security. Citizen wealth